The hidden truth about Noah's flood. From the Bible. What if everything you thought you knew about Noah's flood was only the beginning of a much deeper, more terrifying truth? The warning signs were there all along. For 120 years, Noah hammered. Day after day, the sound of his tools echoed across the ancient landscape like a death knell that no one understood. The people of his generation, brilliant, advanced, powerful, laughed at the old man building his massive vessel on dry ground, miles from any sea. But Noah wasn't just building a boat. He was constructing humanity's only escape pod from the greatest catastrophe the world had ever known. The biblical account tells us something chilling. God looked down at his creation and saw that every intention of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil continually. This wasn't about a few bad people making poor choices. This was about an entire civilization so corrupted, so twisted in its thinking, that divine intervention became the only solution. The real timeline. More terrifying than you think. Here's what most people don't realize about the timeline. Noah didn't just wake up one morning and start building. Genesis tells us he was 600 years old when the flood came. But the warning came much earlier. For over a century, this man devoted his entire life to preparing for something that had never happened before in human history. Think about that. For 120 years, Noah lived with the knowledge that everyone around him, his neighbors, his community, perhaps even extended family, was going to die. Every conversation, every interaction, every day was shadowed by this terrible secret that God had revealed to him. The people of Noah's time weren't primitive cave dwellers. The Bible suggests they were advanced, perhaps even more sophisticated than we imagine. They had developed agriculture, built cities, created music and metalwork. Genesis mentions that they were mighty men of renown. These weren't ignorant people. They were intelligent enough to recognize that Noah's project made no rational sense, yet they couldn't see what was coming. The Nephilim factor. The untold horror. But here's where the story becomes truly disturbing, and where many modern interpretations have sanitized the biblical account. Genesis 6 mentions something that most Sunday school lessons skip over entirely. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. This isn't folklore or mythology buried in the text. This is biblical history, describing something so abnormal, so contrary to God's design, that it contributed to the decision to wipe the slate clean. The Hebrew word Nephilim comes from Nephil, meaning to fall. These were the fallen ones, beings that represented a corruption so fundamental that it threatened the very genetic integrity of humanity itself. The text suggests that supernatural beings had interfered with human bloodlines, creating hybrid offspring that were mighty men of renown. This wasn't just moral corruption. This was biological contamination on a scale that threatened to make humanity unredeemable. The 8 souls. Why these specific people? When God looked across the entire earth, he found exactly 8 people worth saving. Not 800, not 80. 8. Noah and his wife, their 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. Out of what could have been millions of people spread across the ancient world, only these 8 individuals maintained the genetic and spiritual purity necessary to restart the human race. The Bible says Noah was righteous in his generation and walked with God, but it also says he was perfect. And the Hebrew word used here, tamim, doesn't just mean morally perfect. It means complete, whole, without blemish. In the context of widespread genetic contamination, Noah's family may have been the only humans left who were still completely human. The 40 days and 40 nights, nature turned upside down. When the flood finally came, it wasn't just rain. The Bible describes something far more catastrophic. All the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. This suggests a geological upheaval beyond anything in recorded history. The fountains of the great deep implies massive underground water reserves, perhaps entire subterranean oceans, erupting to the surface. Combined with unprecedented rainfall, this would have created conditions that make our worst natural disasters look like minor inconveniences. For 40 days and 40 nights, this continued. But the water didn't recede immediately. The Bible tells us the water prevailed on the earth for 150 days. That's approximately 5 months of total global inundation, with water levels so high that even the highest mountains were covered by more than 20 feet of water. The impossible task. How did 8 people do it? Here's something that troubles many readers when they really think about it. How did 8 people care for representatives of every living creature on Earth for over a year inside a wooden vessel? The logistics seem impossible. Feeding schedules, waste removal, climate control, exercise, medical care, separating predators from prey, managing animals from completely different environments, Arctic, desert, tropical, temperate. Yet the biblical account is matter-of-fact about it. It doesn't dwell on the impossibility, it simply states what happened. This suggests that what occurred inside the ark was as miraculous as the flood itself. Perhaps the normal rules of animal behavior were suspended. Perhaps the animals hibernated or entered supernatural states of dormancy. Perhaps God directly sustained them in ways that bypassed normal biological needs. The point isn't to explain away the miracle. It's to recognize that saving Noah's family required constant divine intervention on a scale that most people never consider. The dove and the raven, symbols of hope and despair. After months of floating on an endless ocean that covered the entire world, Noah sent out birds to test whether the water had receded. First, he released a raven, a scavenger that could survive by feeding on the countless floating corpses. The raven flew to and fro until the waters dried up from the earth. Then he sent a dove. The first time, it returned because it found no place to rest. The second time, it brought back an olive leaf. The third time, it didn't return at all. Think about what that olive leaf meant. It represented the first sign of life returning to a world that had been completely sterilized. Every plant, every tree, every living thing on dry land had been destroyed. That single olive leaf was proof that God was beginning the process of restoration, allowing life to emerge again from what had been a global grave. The new world. Starting over from zero. When Noah's family finally left the ark, they stepped into a world that was completely empty of human civilization. Every city, every building, every work of art, every library, every monument to human achievement had been erased. The advanced civilization that had existed before, with all its technology, culture, and knowledge, was gone forever. Only what Noah's family carried in their memories remained of the old world. But more than that, they stepped into a world that was fundamentally different. The Bible suggests that the pre-flood world had different atmospheric conditions, different geography, different weather patterns. The rainbow that God showed Noah as a sign of his covenant may have been the first rainbow in human history, implying that the atmospheric conditions that create rainbows didn't exist before the flood. The covenant. God's promise and warning. God's rainbow covenant with Noah wasn't just a promise never to flood the earth again. It was also a warning. God essentially said, "I will never again destroy the world this way, but make no mistake, judgment will come." The flood established a pattern that echoes throughout the rest of biblical history. God's patience has limits. He gives warnings. He provides ways of escape for those who listen. But eventually, justice must be served. The hidden truth, why this story matters today. Here's the hidden truth that makes Noah's flood relevant to our modern world. The same conditions that led to the flood are developing again. Jesus himself said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. The people of Noah's time weren't necessarily more evil than people of other eras. Their sin was normalcy in the face of coming judgment. They continued their daily routines, their business as usual, their assumption that tomorrow would be like today, right up until the moment the first raindrops fell. They had 120 years of warning through Noah's preaching and boat building. They had a righteous man living among them as a constant reminder that something was coming. They had time to ask questions, to investigate, to reconsider their choices. Instead, They dismissed the warning signs and continued with their lives as if nothing was wrong.